Okay, I am going to talk about how the industrial revolution came to be in England in the early mid 18th century. What we have here is a an equation. Um, this plus this plus this equals this plus this equals this plus this equals this. Subtract this equals this. So it's an equation. You guys get this from math. And these are all the elements that are necessary for the Industrial Revolution to take off in a place like England. Okay, so we're going to start with talking about the Industrial Revolution as it began. Here's more of the view. Okay, as I said in class, I see this as the second biggest event in human history, right behind the Neolithic Revolution, because everything changes. But a big event like this doesn't happen out of nowhere, so what we want to do is come up with a little bit of context. It's not totally random. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how it came to be and why it took a while for the Industrial Revolution to spread. Um, Invariably, it had a dramatic impact on the world, and this is what we're ultimately looking at in later projects. So here we are. It's England. It's the 1750s. England is in a pretty good place. It's got some big time colonies around the world. It's got a thriving urban culture in England itself. A pretty big population, especially compared to other places around the world at the time. England is doing pretty well in the mid 18th century. And one of the things it had was a lot of economic things going for it. The economic climate in England was something that allowed industry to exist. And again, this is one of the elements that existed in England. It may have existed elsewhere as well, but not every country in the world has these elements that allowed that England had that allowed industry to happen. For one thing, people had a lot of economic freedom. They could move where they wanted to move. They could develop, open up jobs, start companies. They could have jobs where they wanted to. They were free to move around. They were free to do with their money as they wished without a lot of government interference. We often take that as a given here in the United States, but that is currently still not a given, and it was certainly not a given for all the countries in the mid 18th century. A lot of people were ready to make profits too. Making money was something that they were allowed to do, something they were encouraged to do, and they just had to find a way to do it. And again, something that was true in England, but not always anywhere. Mobile workforce is really important, so that having people who could move from city to city, from job to job, wherever the work was there, wherever the pay was best, absolutely critical for industry and for just for a really functional economy for a country. Not every workforce is mobile. Back in the days of the feudal system, the workforce was stuck on the land where they lived. They weren't allowed to legally. They weren't allowed to leave the land, and that meant that that Europe was economically stagnant. But the fact is, now that serfdom is gone, it's been gone for a few centuries. The workforce is mobile, and England is certainly in a situation where people can go where the money is. Another thing that England had going for it was a large market. What I don't mean is like a shopping mall, that would be a large market, but what I'm talking about is a huge number of people. Those people have some money. They don't have a ton of money, but there are a lot of people with some money, and they want to spend that money. They're willing to buy things if the right product comes along. So all of these economic aspects, the mobile workforce, the large market, the profit making, and the economic freedom were all true in England. So a lot of that was true in France. Some of that was true in the Netherlands and Spain and Portugal, but not totally. And a lot of that was not true in other places around the world. Think Africa, think the Americas, and think Asia. All right, so you take that economic climate, and to that you add food. Something that was interesting, right at the time of the Industrial Revolution, there was greater agricultural production than we've ever seen before. Using new techniques of agricultural production, people were able to make way more food to feed way more people. There was a 300% increase of food, which meant that not everybody had to be a farmer anymore. They were also using that um, extra food for profits. And so the farmers were, so there was actually a fair amount of money going into farming if you could get a job in farming, and that was part of the issue. There were more and more people without land because individual farmers were able to do so much more with the land that they had. They were able to buy up larger and larger farms, which meant that your land would disappear. If you might own a small farm, that small farm might have become part of a bigger farm, and you were left without land, which meant that you would go into cities. And if you moved into the city, you needed work. And as factories started popping up with this industrial revolution, that was a great place for those now landless former farmers to work. Um, so all of this is happening at the same time. So what we have then is we've got the economic climate plus we've got this agricultural situation. And again, not true everywhere that this agricultural boom was taking place. To this, you add a huge global empire. Britain had a system of economy called mercantilism. And one of the aspects of mercantilism is that they go out and they get colonies. They get colonies all over the place. This was something that Spain had been doing, something that Portugal had been doing, France had been doing, that Netherlands had been doing. A lot of these European competitor European countries were doing. Get a lot of colonies, get a lot of land, and then you can you conquer these colonies, and all of the profits from those colonies are going to benefit your country, right? So British colonies were not there to to profit the colonists, although the colonists would certainly enjoy a profit. The profits of the colonies were there to benefit the king and queen of the country. So you think about the Canada and the 13 colonies on the east coast of what is now the United States that eventually would declare independence. Remember, we're talking about pre-American Revolution. You think about British presence in the Indian Ocean maritime system at this point. The British are building have a global empire based on their strong navy, their ability to protect their merchants, to be able to protect their holdings. It's a big part of it. And ultimately, it's their global empire. What's absolutely critical about a global empire in terms of factories is that Britain might not have all of the natural resources that they need to be able to make the products that they want. But if you have an empire all around the globe, maybe one of your colonies does. And that's absolutely critical because we talked in class about how resources were really necessary. Britain's little. It's a little island. They've got a lot of stuff, but they don't have everything. And it's also pretty far north, so it's not a fabulous climate for everything. Well, if you have an empire around the globe, if you've got a lot of access to a lot of land, that means you have access to a lot of natural resources, which are going to go into your factories and it's going to make your products. For example, if you're making pencils, if you're making desks, if you're making things out of wood, you want access to a part of your empire would be a place that has a lot of forests, a lot of trees, a lot of lumber. So Britain had a large global empire. Well, that's not true for China. That's not true for Japan. That's not true for pretty much all of Asia, all of Africa, the Americas. The global empire was true for Europe alone. And so again, another element. Britain had all of these elements. France had some, but not all. Spain had some, but not all. Netherlands had some, but not all. And then the rest of the world had many missing. So you take the economic climate in Britain, you take the agricultural boom, and you take the large British global empire, and what results is cotton. This is a picture of cotton growing on cotton bushes. Absolute explosion of the cotton textile industry. They were growing cotton like crazy in the British Empire, in the American South, in the Caribbean, and in India. And people loved cotton. And the reason they love cotton is because cotton is so freaking comfortable. You are currently wearing something cotton. I am wearing something cotton. We love cotton. And because of its comfort, people want it. What's interesting, though, is that cotton is expensive to make if you don't mechanize it. If you don't use a machine to make the cotton, then it's really expensive. So by using simple machines, they were able to make cotton textiles, cotton cloth, pretty cheaply. If it's cheap, you have that many more people who are able to buy the product, and then you're able to make that much more money. One of the simple machines they used was a machine called the spinning jenny. You can see that the woman is cranking a wheel with her right arm, and then she's got these threads. Let me use the mouse here. You see these threads here that are spinning back and forth as she cranks the wheel. See, she's cranking the wheel here. This is turning and spinning, and the cotton thread is able to go on these spindles really, really quickly. Spinning Jenny was able to make cotton thread really quickly that they were able to put onto looms and then make the cotton cloth pretty well. So you take this explosion of the cotton textile industry, but you notice that something is faulty with the spinning jenny. It requires her to crank it. Eventually, her arm is going to get tired. And if she keeps going, she's going to collapse. And if she keeps going, her arm's going to fall off. She needs to stop for bathroom breaks. She needs to stop for lunch breaks. She needs to stop to do lame things like go to sleep. It limits the potential of what the spinning jenny can do. So what you need is a new energy source. And that new energy source is going to be coal. This is a picture of two coal miners sandwiched in a very, very small area of space underground. Pretty horrible conditions. There was an over-reliance on humans and animals in Britain during this time, actually all over the place during this time. Over-reliance on humans and animals to get as a source of energy. The woman cranking the wheel herself, getting a donkey to walk around in circles, pulling a crank that was going to be rotating the mill, the grinding of the mill, things like that. Over-reliance on humans and animals, which means that people get tired and they need another source of energy. They would use wood, but it turns out that over the years, Britain has cut down most of its forests. There's not a lot of wood available, and so they need something else. What that else was coal. We've already seen this happening in the starting in previous centuries. More and more people are digging coal out of the ground and using that. It burns extremely hot, takes a long time to burn. Instead of the quick fires, I don't know if you guys have ever had a bonfire with wood before, but it burns pretty quickly. Coal will last a really long time, get really, really hot. It's much, much, much more efficient. So they are using more and more and more coal as a source of heat for their homes and for their businesses. Why not use it as a source of heat for an energy for your spinning jenny? But how? How are you going to turn the heat of coal into a source of energy to make that wheel spin? And the answer is the steam engine. The steam engine is probably the most important invention of the Industrial Revolution. And the steam engine could be big. This is one that could be 2 or 3 stories tall. A person would be, about that tall, and then, could be really, really big and fill a factory. It also could be really small. You could put one of these onto a train. So a steam engine, this is how a steam engine works. Follow the mouse. You'll see that there is a wheel here. That's the same wheel, for all intents and purposes, that the woman is cranking. So how do you get that to turn? Well, what they've done is they've attached this arm and this arm, and they want this arm to move up and down, and by moving it up and down, it'll pull this guy up and then down, up, down, and you notice that it'll go in an oval, which will crank the wheel in a circle. Okay, so you want this arm to go up and down. How do you get this arm to go up and down? Well, you'll notice that this arm is part of I guess it's a lever, back and forth, with this in the middle. When this goes down, this goes up. When this goes down, this goes up. So you get this down, up, back and forth, kind of like a seesaw, back and forth. Okay. Then, so the question is, how do we get this arm to go up and down? Well, that's where this chamber comes in. What you have is a rubber piston here. This is a cutaway, so you can see inside of it. This would be totally encapsulated. Down here, you've got a lot of water. You get a hot fire that boils this water, and what happens is when it boils the water, steam is forced up through these pipes. Steam opens, a valve opens, and the steam fills this top container here, and the pressure of the steam forces this guy to go down. which means the arm goes down and this arm goes up. The wheel cranks a little bit. This valve closes, another valve opens here. The steam goes in, fills up this now what is now a smaller compartment, forces the piston to go up. The arm goes up, and this arm goes down. Cranks it a little bit more. Fill, down, fill, up, fill, down, fill, up, fill, down, fill, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. The wheel cranks, the wheel cranks, the wheel cranks. And as long as there's water, and as long as there's a hot fire that's boiling the water, this can run 24/7. You can oil. The oil is really necessary for these types of machines because it's all metal. You can oil the different parts where the metal is rubbing against metal. As long as that's going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, this is going up, down, and turning the crank of the wheel. And the wheel is attached to the rest of the parts of the factory or the rest of parts of the train or the rest of the parts of whatever. And it makes the wheel crank and crank and crank, which makes the factory move, like the spinning jenny, like anything. And it just keeps going and going and going. In a big factory, you might have 4 or 5 of these things all running at the same time. And again, this would be a huge machine. In a train, it's going to be much, much smaller, but it's the exact same concept. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, because of the boiling water. Going in, forcing it down, going in, forcing it up, going in, forcing it down, going in, forcing it up. Absolutely ingenious. It was invented, so here's the steam engine. It was invented by, it uses high pressure. Oops, that's not, okay. It's invented by James Watt. James Watt is famous for, actually, he wasn't the originator of the original inventor of the steam engine. He actually was one who took someone else's steam engine, modified it, made it better, and he's actually the one who's most famous for building it. Okay, so you've got a steam engine now. You've got this source of energy. You're able to crank out amazing quantities of cotton textiles because you're using the steam engine to do all the work. Now, you guys know in math, when you subtract a negative, it ends up being an addition, right? Well, in this situation, we are going to be subtracting the negative of really, really crappy transportation. See, people have been using horses and boats as the main form of transportation, and they're just not sufficient, right? It's a terrible transport of goods. It can only carry only a little bit of cotton, only a little bit of textiles, only a little bit of coal. They need something that's big time transport. And so what they do is they end up getting trains, the invention of a train. Railroads and trains are absolutely critical for the development of industry because what they can do is they can carry huge, literally tons and tons and tons of coal, of products, of finished products, of natural resources all over England and conceivably other places as well. Railroads will end up, millions of miles of railroads will eventually be built because of this. It's fast, it's easy, it's pretty cheap, and the way it works is here's a giant locomotive that runs on very slick rails, and here is a steam engine physically attached to the front of this train. You get the fire burning here, you get the water boiling here, it's the steam, which is the whistle, and here's the wheel that's turning, crank, 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 faster and faster, because the pistons inside are going up, down, up, down, up, down. It's turning this wheel, which is attached to this wheel, and it's turning and turning and making the train move forward. They're also very difficult to stop for that very reason. You can't just tap on the brake. It's usually going faster and faster and faster. Railroads are absolutely critical for all of this for a lot of reasons. One thing, it lowered shipping costs. Instead of having horses, which could get tired or die, get sick, and you need lots and lots of them, here's one train that can carry almost everything. It makes the price go way down. It also moves people. Remember, it's not just products, but people are able to travel on these trains and get from city to city to be able to get to the jobs that they need. So migration of people is a big part of it. So that's how the Industrial Revolution was able to take hold in England. It had the economic climate. It had the agriculture to feed the people, which made a lot of people move into cities. It had the natural resources and the markets through its global empire. which led to a huge explosion in the textile industry. That huge explosion in the textile industry, plus the use of coal as a source of energy, was able to lead to the invention of the steam engine. Now that they have a mechanized way of making machines run and a great source of energy and coal 24/7, just keep it going, they needed a better way of transporting products, so they invented trains, and then trains would crisscross the country, allowing all this to happen. People were buying cheap cotton, cheap British-made cotton left and right. Everybody could afford it because it was so cheap. Everybody wanted it because it was so comfortable. Cotton textiles, it turned out it was clothing, which was the first industrial product that everybody wanted. And it had big time effects. The gross national product of Britain quadrupled, which means that they are making 4 times the amount of money that they used to, which means everybody wants it because this is a super moneymaker. Britain tried to keep it secret, but it turns out that eventually France and the Holy Roman Empire and the Netherlands and other countries in Europe caught on. It also spread across the Atlantic into the United States by the early mid 1800s, and they weren't able to keep it secret anymore. Governments, because it was making so much money for the country, governments stepped in to help, and we actually refer to that concept as economic nationalism. The government is stepping in. The government is writing laws that protect these businesses, that help these businesses, that help build trains, that help build factories, that help encourage workers to get to where they're supposed to be, and help these industrialists make a lot of money. A lot of money. A lot of money. And that is the basics of the start of the Industrial Revolution in England, starting in the 1750s and going into the 19th century. Let's see. Okay. Look at that. That's a factory. Modern. It's not a factory that you would have seen back then, but pretty amazing. Okay. That's it. Let's see if I can pause this. There it is.